Bye-bye, Billy. Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana goes down big time. Democrats have officially exhausted all of their opportunities to redistrict Virginia. And legendary pollster Scott Rasmussen gives us a state of polling and what we need to know heading into the midterms. Welcome to the Sean Spicer Show. Let's get into it. All right, guys, good Monday to you. We have a big week, a big show. Thanks for being with us. There's a lot that's going to go down this weekend. Legendary pollster Scott Rasmussen is joining us in just a minute to give us the state of play on what we need to know about the midterms. And trust me when I tell you, he's got a new book out. I read some of the stats that he is including in there. The one that he gives us towards the end of this conversation we're about to have with him is going to blow your mind. I always tell you about what people will do to maintain power in Washington, D.C. The left has gotten really big in this. Everything is in pursuit of power. And trust me, you're not going to want to miss this. It's unbelievable. I want to give everyone a big thank you to everyone who came out to the Trump Kennedy Center Friday night. We had a great event. Hundreds of you turned out on a Friday night to talk about Trump 2.0. I thank the folks at Town Hall for sponsoring it, Larry O'Connor for joining me on stage and asking me questions, and so many of the folks that came out afterwards to be up on the roof there. I was so excited, and thanks, obviously, to all of the staff at the Trump Kennedy Center that made it possible. I will tell you, after our conversation with Scott, Virginia Democrats are in disarray. It is unbelievable. Bill Cassidy also lost his Senate primary. He voted to impeach Trump and then has made Maha a real tough sell. We'll talk about that. And then I'm going to tell you about a voting rights district in Tennessee that you're not going to believe. It is unbelievable. Maryland, though, they're trying to add some redistricting. We'll talk about that. And then Republicans, they should be worried about the Latino vote. We'll talk about that. Susan Collins getting a shout out from J.D. Vance. Unbelievable. And Jonathan Jackson, he's a congressman from Illinois. His dad was Jesse Jackson. He's now saying that athletes should avoid states that are redistricting. It is unbelievable what's happening there. Tuesday, tomorrow, I've got a great Maha panel. We're going to talk about the politics of Maha. Does it make sense going into the midterms or not? We'll break it all down. Then Wednesday, Andrew Giuliani is going to give us an update on his dad, plus security. He's leading the effort for that FIFA tournament that's playing throughout the country in a few weeks. Senator Ron Johnson will also join us. So a lot going on there. Again, thanks to everyone who has bought Trump 2.0. Still feel free to buy it. Without further ado, though, I want to bring in legendary pollster, the president of RMG Research, the founder of the Napleton Research, and the author of a brand new book, Out of Touch, The Elite 1% and the Battle for America's Soul, Mr. Scott Rasmussen. Scott, great to see you. Congrats on the book. You are now, 12 hours away from the book coming out. How do you feel?
Well, I'm excited to get the book out there and, plenty of things to write about and talk about in today's political world.
I got to say, I want to break down the entire book. There's so much that it was actually kind of, to me, I got excited about certain parts. I'll explain why. And then obviously I want to get your take on the current political environment based on your polling background. But I think one of the things, every time that people talk to you, it goes overlooked that you were a co-founder of ESPN.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. People don't remember what the world was like before ESPN. Only one college football game on a weekend. Most major league teams didn't have their games broadcast. It was a bleak time. So the world has changed a little bit since 1979. And what most people don't realize about the ESPN story is it really was a tech story, not a sports story. The reason it happened is because we learned that we could send a satellite signal around America for less money than it costs to send the same signal around Connecticut via traditional landlines. That opened up lots of possibilities.
Are you by background, are you a real sports junkie? I know you're a numbers guy, but are you a sports guy?
I have the sports that I love, and I grew up playing hockey, did a little bit of beach volleyball, and I still believe the world is in bad shape unless the Yankees are the reigning World Series champions.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for being with us today. We have to move on. But just real quick before I get into it, there was this back and forth the last couple of days about the NFL and whether or not streaming services in particular should be getting games. And because there's a big discussion. Obviously, I don't know. Do you have a dog in this fight as far as and it matters that most of these games now are getting bought up by the Amazons of the world, and Netflix is in the game. I mean, like, sports now is going the way of everything else, and I question whether or not free over-the-air broadcast is sort of a thing of the past.
I'm afraid it probably is, and I think that's really bad for the NFL, as well as other sports leagues that have gone this route. Once you begin to narrow your audience and require people to pay before you get there, you begin to lose brand value. It may not show up for 10 years or for a generation, but I believe that if things continue to go the way they appear to, the NFL will be a lot less dominant 10 years from now than it is today.
All right. We're going to keep that on the tape, and we'll see what it is.
All right.
I want to get into the book because it's really interesting. Chris Rufo wrote the intro to the book. And I want to read what I love this, because as you start a book sometimes, and I just published one a couple weeks ago. But I loved how you started it, because not just my intro was President Trump, by the way, but you had Chris Rufo, and he said something in the beginning that I loved because it kind of got my head in the right place. It says the central claim of this book is straightforward but unsettling. A narrow elite has grown increasingly disconnected from the American people, while consolidating influence inside the institutions that shape culture, law, and daily life. This elite does not rule by popular consent so much as by insulation, buffered from voters, shielded from accountability, and confident in moral authority. I thought that, to me, I was like, okay, now I know what I'm getting into. Who is this group of people?
Well, the group that we identify as the elite 1% are people who have a postgraduate degree, they make a lot of money, and they live in densely populated urban areas. I'm not talking Cedar Rapids, I'm talking Manhattan, places like that. These people have a dominant role in the narrative, and it's something that we have been observing over time. It's disguised a little bit in most public debate. I mentioned it's people with a postgraduate degree. The biggest gap among voters is not people with or without a college degree. It's people with a postgraduate degree have views that are much different than everybody else. And when you begin to look at this group, this elite 1%, what's truly frightening is they think the rest of us have too much individual freedom. They have tremendous trust in the federal government. Half of them don't think you should be allowed to vote if you don't have a college degree. Views that are really not just opposed to the American people today, but a complete rejection of America's founding ideals.
All right, can we go through this once again? So they have not just a college degree, a postgraduate
degree.
Okay, I checked that box. I have a degree from the Naval War College. So there's it. Give me the next one.
Okay, so we call you elite adjacent unless you hit all three.
All right, I want to know what's number two.
Number two is you make at least $150,000 a year. Number three is you live in a zip code with at least 10,000 people per square mile.
For where I live in Alexandria, Virginia, there's no question we hit that. So I qualify as one of these elite folks.
That's right. And there are people, and I talk about it in the book, you get into it as a pollster and you start talking about these groups. There are differences. In fact, about 1 out of 5 people in this elite world do think we need more freedom. So it's not a monolithic view. But by and large, this group of people have a huge role, and you do too, in terms of shaping the narrative, in terms of having an impact. By and large, their views are out of touch with most Americans.
So the thing that was interesting is if you look down that three-part checklist, I would assume that if you are more educated, you have more money, and you're around people, like you're interacting with more people, in theory, you should be more aware, right? And then I read something in your book, it was in the early part of it, where you kind of were polling these people, isolating them, and you found out that they all liked Biden.
Right.
And I thought
that was actually
I was like, whoa, time out. So because I'm thinking to myself, how do you look at Biden and what he's doing and his state of being, and then say, I'm smarter, I have more education, I've got more money, I interact with more people, and yet I want that guy?
It was that's actually what led us into this research, because I look at polling data every day and I look at the crosstabs and I saw these three groups consistently out of touch. And I thought the theory was if I combine all three, I'll find something interesting, because, if you get a postgraduate degree and you go to live in Cedar Rapids, you might have different values than if you go to live in Manhattan. That was a theory. And what we found at the time that we did this, Joe Biden had a national approval rating of 41%. Among this elite group, he had an approval rating of 82%. It was mind-boggling to me, but I think it reflects generally an attitude that smart people should run the government, that these people, they actually believe that most Americans share their views, which is another reason they're so dangerous.
But you also get into this divide that we have. By the way, that when I said that number, when I saw that, when I read that it was in the 80s, that's double. I was like, holy smokes! Like, I think I know a lot of these people, by the way, in the DC area, but it explains a lot, because I always assumed, and this is again why maybe I cut against the grain, that if you had more money, obviously you're probably doing better. Right. You're more educated. You'd be like, oh my God, these policies are out of whack. And then I read that statistic that you put in the book that it was like 82% compared to the 41. And I'm like, holy smokes. But you also tell the tale of women who are friends. And I think this is everybody to some extent face this, who just don't talk about politics anymore because that's the one divisive issue. And I think that I've seen that in my family. I've seen that in friend groups where, especially considering that most people know what I do for a living and who I've worked for. And they'll be like, can we not talk about anything political?
Yeah, in the book, I talked about these two Midwestern women. They've known each other for more than 50 years. They have the same values. They actually share pretty similar views on most policy matters. But one went into a world where she sees more Democrats. The other went to see more Republicans. And they just cannot discuss politics. They cannot even comment on a post made by the other one. And unfortunately, they're not alone. They happen to be a nice anecdote that I could share in the book, but our polling shows that only 21% of Americans today have a friend from the other political team that they can have a rational discussion with about politics.
It's interesting because you have this other part, and I don't know whether you call it anecdote or study, because I know you're a pollster and data driven, but so I apologize if I don't say it correctly. But you talk about an example where each side doesn't believe the other side loves the country. We're questioning the motives of folks now. And whereas before it was policy disagreements. I want lower taxes. You want higher taxes, more government, less government, right? That's how I grew up in politics. There was a policy difference. Now I fundamentally see you as like an enemy of the country, of my way of life.
Right. And it's really sad. Most Republicans do not believe most Democrats love their country. Most Democrats do not believe most Republicans love their country. One of the interesting things that happens when you dig a little deeper into this is when you ask a Republican about what Democrats think, they're kind of assuming that all Democratic voters agree with whatever the Democratic leaders are saying. And obviously, Democrats do the reverse. The good news is both sides are wrong on this. There's overwhelming love for our country. There is overwhelming belief in our founding ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance. There is a lot of common ground among the American people, but somehow we've lost sight of it.
But Scott, I had Brent Buchanan from Signal Polling on my WABC radio show over the weekend. And one of the statistics that came out of his polling is that among young Americans in particular, socialism as a governing way is now almost matching capitalism. And I do question, if you believe in socialism, then you don't fundamentally understand the being, the ethos, the id of America.
I would agree with you if you were using what you would understand to be socialism. We've done a lot of polling on this topic, and we've asked people what they think socialism means. And among people who say they like socialism, only 1 out of 3 believes it means more money and power going to government. Most people who say they like socialism say they prefer a free market economy. The word socialism Doesn't mean, what people of our era think it means. Most people who like it think it's kind of decision making closer to home. Maybe it's a little bit like, a kinder, gentler form of conservatism or something. There's the words. We have a lot of problems with this in our political bubble. People use words in politics and assume they mean the same thing in the general public, and they just don't.
So it's not that when I think that this young kid likes socialism, I think that he wants basically communism when he wants Russia, Cuba. But what you're telling me is that that's not what he is thinking he's saying when he says socialism.
Correct. Exactly right. In fact, if somebody told me they like socialism, I'd probably say, well, that's great. I like free markets too.
But when they're asked about it, to juxtapose it to capitalism, they just start making the distinction?
Yeah. And again, we think of these words as having precise definitions. Words change meaning over time in different subgroups. My definition of being middle-aged is different than it was 20 years ago. That's just part of life. And so I think this is where we get into a lot of trouble on these topics. We assume that we're all using the same language. In fact, what was the old line about England and America being two nations separated by a common language? I think our elite political circles and the rest of America are now in that same boat.
Well, I wasn't ready to go there, but I'll ask it now because you are a pollster extraordinaire. I've always said how you ask the question is a reflection of what answer you're going to get. So how often now do you look at a poll and say, of course, that's the outcome because they asked it in this way?
Oh, always. Look, if you ask about data centers right now and you say that data centers are needed to support the growth of AI, you will get a more negative answer than if you don't mention AI as part of it. When you talk about an issue like the SAVE Act, people in Washington have a notion of what the SAVE Act is. Only 23% of voters could describe what the SAVE Act is. One of the big things, I talk about this a lot in the book, only 8% of Americans talk politics on a daily basis.
8?
8. This is, there is a group that is politically obsessed, politically engaged. Most Americans aren't. And that creates a lot of the miscommunications. And I believe firmly that if you are the one speaking or if you are the one trying to communicate and your audience doesn't understand you, it's your fault, not theirs. You need to learn their language and find a better way to connect. So if you're in the political world, you need to find ways to connect with people who don't live and breathe politics.
Don't you think this has been my pet peeve with House Republicans in particular, and obviously a lot of Senate Republicans too, which is that they assume that people know what the heck they've done. They know the impact that is, and they'll say stuff like, we've passed the working families bill. And I'm like, no one knows what the heck that is. So like, right. And also you're not going to where they are, right? I saw a stat the other day, 70% of people on the right get their news now online. And so they're still going to traditional media outlets. But I mean, how much of that, I get worried because I actually think Republicans have an agenda to campaign on. They're just not explaining it well.
I think there's a lot to be said for that. In fact, when I speak to political organizations on the right, my first piece of advice is don't talk to normal people the way you talk in this room, because they won't have a clue what you're talking about.
Right.
And we lose sight of that. You need to explain things in things that are relevant to voters. And both sides, Republicans and Democrats, are really having a hard time doing that today. And I think it's because, in the book I talk about how we've become a 10-10-80 nation with 10% on the left at war with 10% on the right. And the remaining 80%, well, they're trying to keep their head down and avoid getting caught in the crossfire. And I think both sides have become so focused. The 10%ers on each side want to beat the other team. They've forgotten that they're supposed to be representing the 80%. They're supposed to be reaching out to them.
I don't mean to sound whiny about this, but as someone who is proud of being a conservative, I have found that one of the things that has changed, and I know you touch on this in the book because you talk about when did things change? How much is Trump a result of this? And I kind of look at this like, I think Donald Trump finally taught people on the right to fight. And what I mean by that is that if you were in corporate America or during the COVID years, you were canceled and censored for asking or believing certain things. I tell people all the time, when I graduated from college, my college commencement speaker in the 90s got canceled because he was from the Bush administration, and they obviously had this, they were pro-life. And I feel like we on the right have had Hollywood, academia, big tech, big, corporate America all against us forever. And so finally to be able to fight back a little, there's a big difference between how the two parties view each other. But I think like we've been on the losing end for decades.
Yes, I think, and this is something that's people, I guess, lose sight of. Donald Trump is not the cause of political polarization. It's been there for a very long time. I trace it back to the moment when the first President Bush broke his read my lips, no new taxes promise. There were a group of people who had been Reagan Republicans who were furious and outraged, and they were waiting for somebody like Donald Trump to fight. It took a long time. It took a lot of different paths before we got there. The biggest difference with Trump and the other Republican nominees in between is he is willing to fight. Some people don't like how hard he fights, but that's really the change that he has brought about.
You have a chapter 11 talking about where do we go from here, and I feel like beyond the 10% of folks on the right that look at the 10% on the left, the role of the media is a problem. I mean, yesterday I was watching Sunday shows, and there was just mountains of misinformation about the Republican positions. One guy talked about on one of the shows on January 6th how they attacked the White House. That's just patently false. The media in this country is the legacy media anyway, is so over the top bias. I wonder what role you think they're playing in all of this divide.
Well, certainly the media plays a role in the divide and the different forms of media, but I would say you've got it a little bit backwards. It was a bigger problem in the 60s and 70s when 94% of Americans watched one of three television networks. All three news shows had exactly the same stories, and it was mostly what they read in the New York Times in the morning. So in the 60s and 70s, there was a tremendous ability of elites to censor debate they didn't want to hear about. If you didn't make those 22 minutes of airtime on the evening news, your story didn't exist. What's happened since then, starting, by the way, with ESPN and that whole cable revolution, people began to have alternate sources of news available. And now with the internet, we see more of it. So yes, the legacy media networks still have influence, but nowhere near to the degree that they did 40, 50 years ago. And in fact, I think that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic about America. The elites have lost control. They have lost the ability to dominate or to control the narrative. And the more that other voices speak out, the better off we'll be.
One thing that I think is different between how the two sides view each other, you mentioned the media proliferation, et and I don't really care about NPR and MSNBC and that's great. I actually just want the other side to exist, kind of to your point. I love that there's the Daily Caller, the Daily Signal, the Daily Wire, right? I love all that. I actually am happy to have plenty of folks on the left. I think that's healthy for democracy. I just want to make sure that we don't get canceled and censored on the right. I think the left, though, actually doesn't view it that way. They don't want the voices on the right to, I mean, you'll hear this a lot. Why are you platforming so-and-so? Why are you giving them voice? Why are you allowing them into the briefing room? There is a difference on how we view each other. I'm fine. You go want to listen to NPR or MS, whatever they're calling themselves. Good for you. But the people on the left don't want, all the organizations that I mentioned to exist. They don't want me to exist. They don't want me to get quoted. They don't want me to publish a book. There are several places when I published my book that wouldn't sell it. You can't walk into a Barnes and Nobles right now and actually get a copy of Trump 2.0. When I first published my other book, The Briefing, Politics and Prose in DC wouldn't carry it. That's the difference. I don't mind. I mean, I go into stores, they carry everybody's, God bless them, good for you. The left does not want to acknowledge the right.
Well, this goes all the way back to the man I consider the worst president in our history, Woodrow Wilson. He was the man who created and really pushed for what we now call the administrative state. And his view was that the problem was voters. Voters aren't smart enough. They shouldn't be involved in policy. We need to have experts deciding everything. And he went so far as to say that the role of these policy experts, of these bureaucrats that we've hired, should be to tell the people what they should get excited about and what they should be interested in. And when they've caught their attention, they had to tell people what they should think about it. I mean, this was Woodrow Wilson's dream of the way our country should work. And what you're describing is very close to that. You go back and read some of his writings, it's among the most chilling things that you're going to ever read. One of his mentors when he was getting his PhD, by the way, he's the only president ever to have had a PhD, but one of his mentors founded the American Economic Association. And to join that association in the 19th century when it was new, you had to disavow free market economics. You had to acknowledge that it didn't work. This is the world that Woodrow Wilson came and the administrative state grew up in. And it is a decidedly top-down centralized control, and only the people who we deem worthy should be heard.
Well, it's funny you talk about that, but in the book you talk about this culture of dependency.
Right.
And I figure that's like downstream from what Wilson's talking about, right? The more people
Right.
are dependent on government and these institutions, the harder it is to sort of talk about having freedom and free will and capitalism when you're creating as you call it, a culture of dependency.
That's right. You know, Peter Drucker long ago said the purpose of a business is to create a customer. And a lot of our government agencies act in that same way. They want to create that culture of dependency.
Yeah. So as we look towards the midterms, let me ask you this. Like, you've been at polling for a while. You're still doing a bunch of it. You highlight a lot of it in the book, obviously, because we just went over some of this. What has changed in the industry of polling since you got into it to where we are now?
Well, I'm going to date myself with that. When I first started polling, the big technical challenge we had to face was there was this new thing called answering machines, and people might start screening their calls. So the world has changed a lot. Now, you know, if I were to pick up the phone and call one of my kids, their first reaction would be, "What's wrong with mom?" Because nobody talks on the phone anymore. You can't do phone polling the way it used to be. There's a lot more difficulty getting a good sample. And I'll just if you do an online survey, you're going to end up with not enough people in rural areas. I presume that's because they have better things to do than be on their phone all day. You're going to get too many postgraduates because they like to take surveys more than other people. So you really have to be very careful about getting your sample. And I think the other thing that I would say that we've lost, and this is perhaps the result of so many polling aggregation sites, polling is not a precise tool. Polling always has a margin of error. You know, if you get into these races and somebody is up by a point in the poll and they lose by a point, that doesn't mean the poll was wrong. It means there was a margin of error. I think we've lost the ability to actually interpret polls with a little bit of humility. And I would say, if you went back far enough, if you went back to 2016, a year you remember well, that's when I really began to notice a gap between the polling and the analysis. Despite all the rumors and the myths, the polling in 2016 was pretty good. Hillary Clinton was projected to win the popular vote by 3 points. She won it by 2. 47 of the states were easily decided, and the winner was picked by polling. There were 3 states that surprised people on election day. Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. In Pennsylvania and Michigan, the polling averages showed the race was a toss-up, and the last poll in each of them showed Trump ahead. Only in Wisconsin was the polling off. The reason people didn't get that vibe going into the election is none of the analysts, none of the talking heads on TV could see it coming. They just couldn't believe it. The only person I know who absolutely believed Donald Trump was going to, the only pollster I know who believed Donald Trump was going to win that night was Pat Caddell.
Interesting. That is fascinating. Is there, as we get closer and closer to the midterms, are there polling outfits that you, instead of crapping on some of them, who are the ones that we should trust the most? How's that? Like, what are the 5 or 10 that when we see a poll that we should say they have a good track record?
I would actually go with the polling averages. I would literally go to a Real Clear Politics and follow their average of the polls. That is the best model you can use. Now, naturally, I think you should look to my polling as part of that, but the averages give you a better sense. And by the people on both sides say, well, the polls are understating my side because they include these garbage polls from the other side. No, a good polling average will have a wide range of polls in it. I think what you also have to remember, and this is something political people don't like to hear, fundamentals matter more than anything else. Yes, candidates matter. Messages matter. Campaign strategy matters in close races. But here's the way to think about the midterms. Number one, if we're still talking about the war in Iran in November, it's going to be a very bad night for Republicans. Simply put, since the war began, the number of people who trust Democrats on key issues has grown significantly. The brand of the Republican Party has been dragged down a bit. Assuming that we're not fighting in Iran, then the next question is, what is the trend in gas prices? The trend, not the absolute level. If we see gas prices falling consistently heading into November, every drop helps the Republicans have a better chance of retaining the House. If the price of gas doesn't come down, once again, it's going to be a bad night for the Republicans. So for the GOP to do well, all you have to do is end the war, get gas prices to come down, and then all your messaging comes in on top of that.
So when you say go down, if somebody's listening to this on, we have a lot of the folks in Capitol Hill and the White House that listen. So let's just say the average is $4.50 a gallon, just for the sake of it. Does it matter that it's $4 or $3.50 as much as it matters that it's trending down for a while?
It's much more what's trending down. People forget, several years ago after the Dobbs decision came out and they said that gave the Democrats all their momentum, the price of gas fell for about 100 days in a row. That was a part of it. And the reason the trend matters more than the absolute value is most of the country lives paycheck to paycheck. Most of their money goes to rent or mortgage or insurance or car payments or whatever. They have a limited amount of disposable income, and that money goes to gas and groceries and other things. Every time the price of gas goes down, it's like they got a little bonus in their weekly spending. Every time the price of gas goes up, it's like they just got a pay cut. So if the trend is going down, people will be feeling better and better about it. The way we track it, we ask people, and I think this is the most important economic question from a political perspective, are your personal finances getting better or worse? The numbers when Joe Biden was in office were horrible. They were getting better pretty consistently up until just before the Iran war. And now people become more pessimistic again. But that's tied primarily to gas prices and other fundamentals.
So when you just mentioned that, it's you were like, if you I love the way you put it. If you can end the war in Iran and get gas prices down, you win. Does that mean that the messaging doesn't matter? Because I know the buzzword right now is affordability. And I guess the way I'm asking you this is how much of the midterms is tied to the policy? So if those two things don't happen, we're screwed. If those two things do happen, we're in good shape. How much do they have control by saying, what if we craft a really good message and hammer it home? Will that make a difference?
Yes, it will. And the messaging has to connect. The reason gas prices are coming down is because of X, Y, and Z, or the reason you're feeling better about you have to make a very clear connection between what people are feeling and make the case that your team is the reason it's happening. That matters a lot. Also, The basics are there, but things do move off the baseline. I believe Senator McCormick would not have won a couple of years ago if it wasn't for the issue of boys playing in girls' sports. That was an important issue that gave all Republicans a little bit of a boost. It wouldn't have mattered if the fundamentals hadn't have made it close. So the messaging and the strategy and the policy can have an impact, but it moves you off a baseline.
All right. The last thing I want to ask you that I found stunning in your polling is that 69% of America's politically active elite class would want their candidate to cheat to win a close election rather than accept the voters' decision. Did that scare you?
That is the most terrifying poll result I've ever seen. And I think it's a direct reflection of the fact that these elites really don't think the voters should have any say in it whatsoever. They think they know best. They also, by the way, believe that if there's a regulation that they think is needed, but that voters disapprove of, they should just ignore the voters and do it. So yes, it is terrifying. I call, the subtitle of the book is The Elite 1% and the Battle for America's Soul. That battle is between elitists who reject our founding ideals and the vast majority of Americans who still embrace the ideals of freedom, equality, and self-governance. We are going to win that battle, but it's probably going to get worse before it gets better.
One quick follow-up. Does that stat break down on partisan or divide, or is it equally where you, because I assume the elite that you talk about is largely leftist. So it's I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. That's the left saying it's okay, do whatever you need to win.
It is. There are some on the right who would say that as well. The way I describe it, Republicans and Democrats among the elites aren't the same as Republicans and Democrats in the general public. If Republicans are a little bit to the right of Democrats among the public, yeah, you'll see a little difference among the elites too, but it's very troubling.
Scott Rasmussen, congratulations. The book is Out of Touch. It is out tomorrow. Go on Amazon right now and order that book. I really appreciate you being with us.
Thank you.
Holy smokes, what a conversation. And by the way, that last day, the guy's been in polling for a long time, and to get shocked by that statistic, that tells you what a big deal it is. These elites who he describes, we know them. These are the people who think they know better than everybody else. And I do think that these folks lean far, far left. You saw that 82% of them thought Biden was doing a good job. These are people who make a decent amount of money, who are well educated and live in these urban areas. This is the problem. And they are willing to do whatever it takes to stay in power. That's what you got to know. But I mentioned at the beginning, Virginia's attempt to redistrict got shot down by the Supreme Court. In one sentence, the Supreme Court made it very clear, we're not taking this case, folks. Not going to happen. And the thing that was so interesting, I couldn't help, but I noticed it before, Virginia Attorney General Jay Jones, maybe if you had actually spelled Virginia right, attorney right, senator right, they might not have, what about this? Filed it in the right court first. This was a clown show from the beginning, but the Supreme Court making it very clear, we're not getting involved in your clown car exercise here. So Virginia's attempt to completely redistrict shifts back, and that's going to be a big, big deal. And you know what? This is a huge rebuke. They probably, when all is said and done, and I know the media tries to minimize this, I think it's well north of $80 million that the left spent on this. Unbelievable. This was a big deal, and I'm glad that they got brought down on this. But in another twist of irony, I've told you guys, I think before, if not, just sit back and listen to this. In Tennessee, there is a Voting Rights Act district. It's in the Memphis area. But here's the kicker. It's been represented by a white guy for a long time. His name is Steve Cohen. You don't ever hear about this, do you? The Democrats don't want to highlight the fact that this district that they drew for a black Democrat has been represented by a white Democrat, Steve Cohen, for a long, long time. Here's where it gets fun, though. After the redistricting, Steve Cohen said, I don't think I can stay. And by the way, I saw him in the airport the other day. The guy is extremely old. He has to be wheeled around in a wheelchair. He's one of these guys that's just hanging on and hanging on and hanging on. But here's the kicker. He said, I just can't do it anymore. These districts were drawn to beat me, so he's giving it up. But there's a strong possibility that it's going to be represented by a black female Republican. So after all of their whining about what this is doing to black representation, you actually are taking out the white Democrat and potentially replacing them with a black female Republican. You don't hear anyone talking about that, do you? No one seemed to care that the white guy was representing the district drawn for a black Democrat in the first place, because as long as it's a Democrat, that's what this is really about. But then when it turns out that they might actually get a black representative, but it just would be a Republican, well, then we don't want to talk about it. I love that thing. I mentioned also Bill Cassidy, the senator from Louisiana, voted out spectacularly Saturday night. I mean, check this out.
Knowing what you know now about the farce that was put forward to the American people and the Congress, knowing what you know now, would you still vote to actually convict Donald Trump of the charges that he was put up for?
Reporters always love to ask that question. I'm a doctor. You give me all the information I can, I make a decision, I move on. I don't keep on going back, oh, what happened 5 years ago? I'm thinking about what's going to happen 5 years
Senator,
from now.
with all due respect,
or tonight.
You just talked
Hang on,
about
Jason,
the stuff
let me
you've
finish.
done for
Let
the
me
last
finish,
5
Jason.
years. You just touted everything you've done for the last 5 years. Why can't you answer that question? Did you or did you not?
Hey, Jason,
knowing
if I
what
can
you
finish,
know now,
Jason, if I can,
I want you to answer that question. Would you or would you not actually vote to convict, knowing what you know now? It's a simple question.
Yeah, Jason, you may go back and flagellate yourself over decisions in the past. I do not. I move on. By the way, what I'm talking about is not just the present, it is the future. By the way, the future also includes that if somebody wants somebody working for the state of Louisiana for the future, not fixated on the past, then polls close at 8 o'clock tonight. Get out there and vote.
This was not the result that I necessarily wanted, but I feel great. When you participate in democracy, sometimes it doesn't turn out the way you want it to.
Julia Letlow, who the president endorsed, got 44.8% of the vote. John Fleming, another former congressman who was a deputy chief of staff in the Trump White House, by the way, under Mark Meadows, and is now state treasurer of Louisiana, came in second at 28.3%. Those two will head to the runoff because that's how Louisiana works. But check this out. In third place, longtime incumbent Senator Bill Cassidy at 24.8%. You can give it a quarter of the vote. That's downright embarrassing. It is downright embarrassing that happened. But I'm going to tell you this. The folks, when it comes to redistricting, Maryland now realizing that they're, maybe the last hope. And they've got one district they can get, Congressman Andy Harris, head of the Freedom Caucus. They're trying to potentially go after him because they're 7-1 right now. They potentially may want to go one out. Chris Van Hollen was talking about this on Meet the Press. Take a listen.
Do you support redrawing the lines before the midterms? What do you say to the charges? It's hypocritical.
Oh, I do if it's possible. Look, here's my view, Kristen. I've always supported nationwide, nonpartisan redistricting. We should put on a blindfold and we should draw congressional districts in nonpartisan ways. But Republicans have blocked that legislation at the federal level. Meanwhile, Trump has ordered Texas to engage in redistricting, which they did. So I am very much opposed to unilateral disarmament. I want to thank California for what they're doing, the Virginians for what they did despite their Supreme Court decision. And Maryland and other states should do what we can because the future control of the House is at stake right here. And we need to do everything we can to prevent a continuation of what is a complete rubber stamp for Donald Trump. You heard Lindsey Graham. He said this is the party of Donald Trump.
All right. You get the point. They'll do whatever they can get, right? But they'll go even further. In California, you know how they set up that system? We've talked about it before. It's everybody runs in one primary. They call it a jungle primary, the top two. Well, it's never been a problem. Democrats always win. But now in California, we're hearing that two Republicans might actually pull this thing out. Steve Hilton and Sheriff Chadlow Bianco. So what are they going to do? You guessed it. California is already talking about getting rid of that system because, well, they're not guaranteeing an outcome anymore that they like. That's just how bad these guys love power. They will do anything. So It's been a great show. Thank you guys for sticking with us and kicking off the week. As I said, I've got a great Maha panel coming your way tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, Andrew Giuliani is going to give an update on his dad and FIFA, and Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin will be here with us. Thanks for being with us. Continue to go out there and buy Trump 2.0 on Amazon. I'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show.